All right, Davis, you should be good to go.
All right, I am going to start with the conflict statements. Members of the committee are hereby advised of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and are instructed to refrain from participating in any matter coming before this committee with respect to which there is a conflict of interest. So I assume everybody's gotten Brian's materials and looked those over. I know he worked hard on trying to digest everything that came out of the last meeting, which was interesting. But Brian, you got any initial thoughts before we start?
No, I mean, and that's where I wanted to kind of share in my email, kind of where I was coming from with some of the different additions, and when we're ready, then I can share my screen and we can just kind of, take a look at what I did, what I did to this opinion. But looking back at that meeting, like I said in the email, the thing that was sticking out to me was, I guess I felt like we were perhaps talking about different things, this concern of, can I bill two people or can I do work for two different people at once? That's not the question. The question is how, if you do that, how is that billing supposed to take place? And so there was, I felt like in some ways the feedback was really helpful, but in other ways it was focused on perhaps a different question that was getting an appropriate reaction if what we were saying is you cannot do work for two clients at once. If that's the case, that deserves kind of a, what are you talking about? I should be able to take a call while I'm driving for somebody. And so but again, that's not really what it was. So that's where some of the language that I included tried to clarify that that's not the question. The question is if and likely when that happens, how do you appropriately bill for that in a way that's compliant with the rules of professional conduct? And so I tried to draft that alternate analysis to reflect this idea that perhaps travel services are just different than legal services, building off of something we were talking about in our prior subcommittee meeting, and that seemed to be the general sentiment at the ethics committee meeting. And I think as I was drafting it and as I was trying to put that into words, I kept on remembering what Jack had said at one of our meetings, that it seems like it kind of makes sense when you're just kind of thinking about the issue, but it's really difficult to put that down on paper without it just looking bad, for lack of a better term. And so, but nevertheless, I put that on there and put that alternate analysis in there. And that's when I guess, like I said, I start thinking about what's the ripple effect? How far does this go? And what sort of parameters do we need to set up to make sure it doesn't go too far? It only touches on what we want to, but still remains kind of logical within the application of the rules of professional conduct. So all that's to say, there's a lot to digest here. I think there's a lot to discuss. I don't know, Davis, if the best approach would be I can share my screen and we can go over this stuff, or we can just kind of jump off, with the presumption that folks have read through the changes, and maybe we can just kind of start at the beginning, see what are people thinking about, which the original analysis versus the alternate analysis.
Yeah, my thought is to kind of digest a little bit more from the meeting and get some comments there about what people are thinking about, and then going through the changes. Seems to me people didn't have much of an issue with inquiry 1, so I still think we're on good footing there, and I like the addition that you added there. If we go with the alternative route, I think adding the new inquiry 2 is helpful. It takes kind of the snippet out of inquiry 1's opinion and creates a whole nother inquiry about flat rate billing. And I think some of the feedback from the meeting I got, was that, the more specific situations we can tackle, the better. Maybe not overstepping our boundaries, but just, to be as specific as we can. And then obviously the very last one with unit billing, the 6-minute unit billing, I think, we're on good footing there.
Right.
So it really comes, does this committee want to tackle the old inquiry number 2, the new inquiry number 3 on this opinion at all? And if so, how do we want to approach it?
Yeah, and I'll add, and Davis, thank you for just kind of giving that overview, because it is like trying to offer some clarity here. And you can see that there was kind of this new inquiry / opinion number 3, as well as what would be a new inquiry opinion / number 4, where we're basically trying to say that, and I think it probably is sending the message, if you want to do this stuff by flat fees, it's a totally different ballgame. If it's a flat fee for a court appearance and you appear for 3 different clients, you can charge those 3 different flat fees, because the flat fee is a charge for a specific or discrete legal task. And it's the same thing if it's a flat fee for travel or if it's a flat fee for that court appearance. That's just a different scenario. It's the hourly billing that becomes problematic in this context, when you're suddenly billing billing one client for travel and one client for legal services. And I guess, just to maybe jump off with there, the new, or I should say the inquiry number and opinion number 3, that's kind of the original analysis that says no. We just kind of give a very basic overview of my additions. It sticks with the same thing, saying, no, you can't do that. It's false or misleading. It's been previously classified as dishonest. It doesn't go into too much as far as saying, this is the most horrible thing in the world. We're not trying to bash people over the head with this, but we are, recognizing what rules are at play here. And then I included some additional language there to articulate, why is it clearly excessive? We just previously said that it's clearly excessive in violation of 1.5A, but it really does lend to this. I think the analysis I included in there was an attempt to explain what about it is clearly excessive. And the idea being that it's clearly excessive because when you bill for travel time, I guess the basis for even billing for travel time on an hourly basis in the first place is that it's a justifiable wage for a lawyer to receive compensation due to the limitations created by that travel, that you're being taken out of the office, you're losing out on work time, and that's why you're able to bill travel time on an hourly basis. And so when you are able to work while traveling, then you are effectively negating that justification for compensation. And so the analysis there is basically saying, when you're, if you're no longer sacrificing the time that could be spent providing legal services in your office due to travel, you're actually providing legal services while you're traveling, well, then there's no real basis for the hourly billing travel time. You could still do flat fee, as the opinion says. You could still do a flat fee. You certainly can charge for expenses, mileage, whatever it may be, or maybe it's a per diem. But the hourly billing is what becomes problematic. And that's what that new language was trying to articulate. So, that's one thing to the subcommittee. Do you all think that's appropriate? But then I added some additional language talking about nothing in this opinion is supposed to prohibit lawyer from doing 2 things for 2 different clients at once, as long as it's not detrimental to either client. It's just kind of an articulation of the notion that if you create an efficiency in your hourly billing structure, your hourly billing capabilities, that efficiency should be passed on to the client. And I tried to provide examples of what could be done. And so to that end, that's where I guess at this point we're talking about it. Let's just make sure we're looking all at the same thing. That's where we get to here, where I tried to articulate some of the options that are available to a lawyer. That essentially a lawyer could prorate the hourly charges. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this. Lawyer could bill one client for the time spent doing legal services and then deduct that from the travel time. And that's something that I have to say, originally I think we talked about that being potentially onerous on the lawyer. But I guess, and I'm curious about your feelings here. Practically speaking, if you're doing work for, let's say you're traveling for client A, and then while you're traveling for client A, you do work for client B, you're going to be writing down the time you spend working for client B at some point. It's just, this notion of well, I'll stop the clock for client A and start the clock for client B, again, if you're doing legal work for client B, you're going to be writing down, I just did an hour's worth of work on this brief while I was on this plane. I just took a 30-minute phone call on behalf of client B while I'm driving for client A. You're recording that time for client B. And so it doesn't seem like an arduous task to ask lawyers, okay, well then just when you finish your 3-hour drive, deduct that 30-minute call that you recorded for client B from the client A travel time, if that's what it is, or figure out that prorated thing. The prorated thing is probably the slightly more complicated thing, because then you're trying to figure out what's the appropriate ratio. You could just stop the billing and for client A and move and bill fully for client B's legal work. Or you could do a set fee that is not based on the hourly rate, like a flat fee or per diem, and that's where there's kind of a reference down to the subsequent opinion. So that's like my attempt to enhance or strengthen the original opinion and analysis in a way that addresses some of the concerns that we heard at the meeting, namely this question of, can I actually do work for 2 different clients at the same time? Yes, you can. It's just about how you bill that, but then also clarifying what can a lawyer do instead of just leaving it out there. It's not really within our parameters to say what you must do, but we can provide some suggestions. We can provide some help and some guidance. The alternate opinion is where we get into this thing where we're saying yes, and we would be one of the only jurisdictions that actually says yes, if not the only jurisdiction that says yes, you can bill as long as it's not clearly excessive and the client consents. And I tried to articulate how if we were going to say yes, you can bill full hourly rate for travel time and full hourly rate for legal work for 2 different clients at the same time, that a client needs to consent to that. It needs to be clearly set out to the client, and including that the client is aware that this can happen. And I think that's the thing that I tried to capture there. But I started running into these questions as I thought about it of, well, how are we saying as long as the client agrees to this travel being able to work for another client while I'm traveling for you, client A, how is that permission not granted to the scenario in inquiry and opinion number 1? Could a lawyer go and say, hey, I'm going to make a court appearance for you. I'm going to bill you an hour, but you got to understand, I may make court appearances for other folks at the same time, and I'm going to also be billing them an hour. And if the clients consent to it, then why should they not be prohibited from doing that? I think that was the part where I started feeling a bit of kind of an icky logical spot, because it feels like if it's all about client consent, then can you have the client's consent to something that we feel is still not appropriate, but like, does client consent kind of make everything okay? And again, even like looking on and seeing what are some other, if we go with this alternate opinion, if we look at some other potential inquiries, the alternate opinion makes a distinction not between clients as much as between tasks. Legal services and travel services are separate tasks that can be provided at the same time without a detrimental impact on each other. So is it possible then that you could charge client A for travel while also completing work for client A? If we're saying that they're separate tasks, why can't you have separate charges at the same time for the same client? Because they're, again, the client's receiving the benefit of that. I don't like that, and I feel very icky about that. But logically speaking, it feels like if it's okay with the client A and client B scenario, why couldn't you have 2 charges to client A, because you're doing 2 distinct separate tasks at the same time? And I feel like that it's almost like the alternate analysis produces a result that I feel uncomfortable with. I don't know how you all feel, and that's kind of where I wanted to get your feedback on this. So I've said a lot. I'm going to stop talking, and I would love to hear some thoughts on all these different things.
I personally like the inquiry number 3. I think that's more realistic for today's lawyer and how work is being completed.
Dorothy, do you mean the alternative or original? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Alternative, sorry, the one
Yeah,
that allows
you.
for you to bill for the travel time for one client and the work that you're doing for another client.
Yeah.
With the consent by the client, or informing the clients, all clients. And I would expect that how that would be taken care of or handled would be that in the fee agreements, it would include some language that says that these are some possibilities that could occur. So to cover that up front with the clients. I see it a little different than what you described, Brian. I don't see this covering the initial opinion, in that being able to bill client A for travel time and for the work. I think if it's one client, then that is, you're billing everything for that client. And if it's a separate thing, like if you told them that you're going to charge for plane tickets, then that's separate than the actual traveling there, the hours that you're spending working on this work. That's different. But if it's two different clients and two different things, then I see a clear distinction there. And that's an easy distinction to be made, as opposed to when you have one person going to court for 3 different clients or 4 different clients, and you need to kind of prorate that out for the different clients. That to me is a whole different scenario. And I think this alternative opinion number 3 covers that. And I think it's really clear in describing how it can be done and the specific scenario for it. Especially with the clients being told up front that this is a possibility, like that could happen, and those charges could be made. But I actually think that that's a more realistic scenario based on today's attorneys and clientele, just trying to be able to maximize. Honestly, I don't think that clients really care so much about when their work is getting done by their attorney is performing the work, as long as it's getting done. Not saying that they want it to be excessive, but I mean, I think they're more concerned about it being quality work and being, actually getting done in a timely manner. So the fact that the attorney can maximize on their time while they're traveling, working on somebody else's stuff, I mean, I think that's fair.
Do you think it applies that other scenario that I wrote up of you're traveling and working for a single client and you're charging for 2 distinct tasks? Do you think client A could be charged an hourly rate for travel while also completing work for client A at the same time? Like you're rehearsing your closing argument on the way to on your 2-hour drive to the hearing over in Wilmington, and you're doing work. Do you think that lawyer could charge client A both travel and legal work hourly fees at the same time?
I yes and no. So I say yes if it's travel, like for what I was talking about before. If it's you're on a plane ride and you had to pay the expense of the plane ticket, you can charge for that. And while you're sitting on the plane, you're working. Then I see that as you've been able to charge for both of those, but not driving and rehearsing your argument in the car at the same time. I think that's all part of one. That should be one cost that's charged to the client in that regard.
Yeah, I think that would be in the excessive field, right, where you get, and I think that, yeah, but I think what Dorothy's saying is perfectly summarizing what I've got. The feedback from the entire section was along those lines, along with wanting their attorneys to be accessible to them. That's the other part of it. And but anyway, well, one thing I was thinking that if we decide to go the route of the alternative would be to make another inquiry that very much mirrors number 1 in terms of just travel. If you're traveling to court for 4 clients, you can't, and we've now said that travel is a separate service. You can't bill 4 clients for that same hour traveling. So I think that would provide a little more, just be a little more specific there, that if you're going to court that's an hour away for 4 clients, you can't bill 4 hours of travel. Like you can't bill 4 hours of legal service for being in court for an hour.
I agree with that 100%.
I do too.
On the indigent defense services side for court appointed, that is a requirement that if you got 4 different clients and you're spending 1 hour for the 4, you give them both a 4th. I mean, you charge a 4th to each client.
And that's what Inquiry 1 covers in terms of legal services. I'm just thinking if we differentiate between travel and legal services, now we need one that also says the same for travel. If you're traveling an hour.
Oh yeah, I agree. I'm saying I agree with you wholeheartedly on all of that.
So does this create a scenario that lawyers could, if they are traveling for client A and they get to charge $150 an hour, if they do work for client A at that same time, they take a call from their client, anticipating, the arrival at the deposition and just kind of going over some stuff, whatever it may be, or talking with whoever it may be. For client A, they can't charge the $150 an hour travel time plus the legal work time. They really would probably just opt to choose to charge the legal work time. Let's say it's $300 an hour. But now lawyer knows that they can travel for client A at $150 an hour, but as long as they do work for client B, they can charge that $300 an hour. So they're really getting paid $450 an hour. Is that like creating a scenario where they can game the system, so to speak, because now they can charge those 2 separate tasks because it's 2 different clients? And is that a result that we're comfortable with?
I think we're getting close to maybe too micromanaging that.
Okay.
A scenario that I had a lot. Corporation X, which sends, 50 cases a quarter to the firm. You're traveling for them because they want your butt in Charlotte for a deposition. So you're up at 6 a.m, you're driving, and the vice president of the company, who's in charge of sending all these cases to you, has you going to Charlotte to take a deposition in case A. But at 7:20, he calls ranting and raving about case B and maxes you out for 2 hours on the drive on a totally separate case where you guys are plugging away, working out all the logistics of a stipulation of dismissal in a case that you're trying to settle. It's not the same client, but it is the same client.
So do you think,
wouldn't that be analogous to wouldn't that be more analogous to work of an A and B scenario rather than, because I know what you're saying. And if it's the same client, let's say I'm driving to Duplin County for Ms. Harris's motion for summary judgment. En route, Ms. Harrison calls me, and this happens all the time. I'm nervous, what's going to happen? And we talk it through. That doesn't get double billed. That's like practicing, that's like practicing your opening statement. That just gets eaten into your travel time, and you lose in the long run because that's harder work than just travel time. But you cut the client a slack. You don't charge Miss Harrison. But Vice President of Corporation X, who just sent you 50 cases 2 weeks ago, calling about a whole bunch of other stuff, I think that's more analogous to an A-B scenario.
So I guess under your scenario, Jack, then like as much as you say like you don't bill that, this opinion says lawyers, you can bill that.
No. I would bill those 2 separate clients. So
right.
You're driving to Charlotte on the Schwartz matter. But the same client, not Mr. Schwartz, the corporation who's sending you all these different cases is calling you ranting and raving about the McGillicuddy file.
Right.
One would be billed under McGillicuddy, and the travel and the deposition would be billed under Schwartz. But the conversation with the ranting and raving, and by the way, there should be some compensation just to have to deal with ranting and raving clients at 7:30 in the morning. Right. Anyway, so is that a scenario where it's two different clients, or it's one client, but they get billed in multiple ways? You know, every single insurance defense firm in this state has that scenario happen weekly.
Right. No, and I've heard back from some of the insurance defense folks.
Yeah, Cranfield Sumner would be going crazy over all this stuff.
Yeah, which and it's just funny because like it's that, I mean, again, that's just like this is neither here nor there. It's the notion that the answer from the ethics department has been the same, and it's been the original opinion like forever. But I know people have not been following that. And so this is that question of like, do we basically put in the answer that we're floating around with, this alternate answer, I think is one that, you know, again, we'd be the first jurisdiction to say that's okay. It does, and I don't know if you saw the federal policies or whatever for that whole double billing, which is kind of it's strangely written because it talks about work and travel done in common or something like that must be prorated. Double billing is prohibited. And I think they're getting at this scenario here that it's applying, they're basically equating travel and work completed for one. So I think if we went with the alternate analysis, we probably need another inquiry that says, like, this does not overrule, or maybe some language, this does not overrule any sort of stated policies for submitting your hours, your billables and all that kind of stuff, whether it's a government or otherwise. Just that's, if you get a court-appointed client from the federal government, you can't say, well, the state of North Carolina says this isn't unethical, so I'm going to go ahead and double bill. That's, we don't overrule them. But that's something that I guess that's it struck me with like conversations, and of course they're conversations mostly around here in this building, which are limited. They're from a particular perspective of just kind of the question of, you know, accessibility to that clients want to their lawyers. There's no question that accessibility remains, you know, like this has never been about saying lawyers should opt to listen to music or watch a movie instead of do work for the client. Lawyer can be as accessible as he or she wants. It's just, how do you bill the person, and what sort of message does it send to the public if we put out an opinion that says, lawyer, you can bill one client for $150 for travel while you're also working for another client for $300, you know? And I guess that's the, you know, it's that question, is the public going to ask, you know, why am I paying for somebody? I'm paying my lawyer essentially to be able to work. He's on the plane billing $300 an hour. Why am I paying him $150 an hour while he gets to bill just like he's sitting at his desk? I don't have to pay him to sit at his desk. And it's because you're traveling and all that stuff. And again, that's the question to me of, is a flat fee just better? Flat fees, to me, flat fees are easy to stomach in my mind. You can probably see, like, I have hesitation with the alternate analysis because of the, I guess, the message it sends. But I also recognize the practicality of it and the reality of it. That's where my internal struggle is kind of going off. So anyway,
I might be going too far with this, Brian, but I think I'm with Jack that the more we talk about this, I think the more we're going to like really make it too minute. But I don't see that what you just described as far as like somebody paying, if somebody's paid for the travel expenses and that lawyer is being able to work for another client the client feeling like I'm paying my lawyer to work for somebody else. I mean, maybe I'm going too far, but I don't see that any different than like if you got a salaried lawyer that's already being paid and then they're able to bill their different clients. I think at the end of the day, I mean, like what we initially said, I think the clients being able to have their attorneys be accessible to them is what's most important. If it was the fact that they were doing it and they didn't inform the clients, that's where I think it would become a problem.
Right. And I think the expenses thing
up front is a huge part of this.
Right. The expenses thing, you know, to be clear, that's I totally agree with you on that one. My stomach only kind of starts turning at the hourly billing, that you're getting paid $150 an hour to sit on a plane, not the airplane ticket, or the hotel expenses, the mileage, all that stuff. That's expenses. as opposed to paying your hourly time. So you just billed 5 hours over the course of 3 hours, 2 hours of work and 3 hours of travel time. It's going back to that same thing, that we're saying that, essentially we think that's permissible, that a lawyer can bill 5 hours and 3 actual hours of work because they're doing 2 discrete tasks. And I think the ripple effect is the thing that I go through. And I don't know if that was another scenario that I posed down there. I wanted to get some feedback on that. Lawyer goes to court and is waiting for the hearing to get called, and they wait an hour. And while they're waiting for the hearing to get called, lawyer completes work for another client. And I imagine that's a pretty common scenario. What's the typical billing practice? Are you allowed to bill your client on whose behalf you're appearing at the hearing for your hourly rate to sit there in court while you're also billing another client while you're responding to emails and working on a brief? So, again, you're billing 2 different clients over the same actual time period. Call it 90 minutes of work over the course of 60 minutes. Is it 2 hours of work over the course of 1 hour?
That's a great question. And let me just say this. Okay, so I'm in Rockingham County 3 weeks ago, and I'm waiting to have a summary judgment motion heard. But the judge says, you need to pause because there's a criminal matter I have to hear. They had a hard time getting a translator for this hearing. So I'm supposed to go on first after lunch, and I'm expecting a good 2-3 hour argument. And all of a sudden, everything gets thrown off an hour and a half because we got to wait for this translator and blah, blah, blah. So I walk out into the hallway, and I check my phone, and I do a text, and I do an email. And the reality of it is, my guess is that stuff just got lost. I think, like most lawyers, I must always just err on the side of, that day, I'm sure, if you looked at my billing, I traveled to Rockingham County, I argued the case, blah, 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 blah. And the text here and the phone. And so I think part of what is going now to Dorothy's point about the micromanaging and getting into the minutia is, I think lawyers in general aren't going to be running around billing for every little 30-second phone call or 2-minute text to a client. That stuff is just gratis that we constantly give clients all the time. And so when we get now to this matter, and we're trying to drill down to tell people, make sure you remember your 2 minutes here. And if you answered that for 2 minutes while you were waiting in the courtroom, you got to subtract the time for and at some point your head's just going to blow up. And this is the last thing I'll say, then I'll shut up. But so I threw this out as a hypothetical to my wine group. And the wine group is made up of mainly people who all utilize attorneys on a pretty regular basis. They're accountants, they're architects, they're doctors, and I laid out what we're talking about. And I said, how do you guys feel about it? Are you going to be I just wanted to get a vibe of people who pay a lot of money normally to lawyers because it's part of their bread. And it goes back to what Dorothy said 5 minutes ago. There was a little bit of pause and shock. They're like, you're giving me the service I want. I'm getting what, I don't know if I just went out there.
Yeah, you're flashing back. It's not max headroom necessarily, but it's getting there.
It's like old cable antenna or something going on.
Right. You're getting to the good part too.
Yeah. Well,
I'll just throw where he was going.
We've gone a long time in number of years without an opinion on this. And so it seems like people have been getting by without a lot of referrals for, I guess improper billing or whatnot. But it seems to me that if we addressed, the inquiry 1, which is clearly dishonest, and then we do the inquiry 2, and then the last inquiry, which basically spells out the same scenario in 3 different types of billing. You got hour billings, 6-minute small unit billing and then flat fee billing, you know, I think we're accomplishing some real good there without micromanaging anything and without, you know, opening this rabbit hole where people, you know, just confusing the air.
So Davis, can I get some clarity? So you're talking about like the original thing where we said, no, you can't do this. And this is where it offered the suggestions that you just mentioned. That stuff, we're effectively striking through. We're deleting that.
Yeah, I mean, it basically the inquiry about travel, anything to do with travel and billing at the same time, we would do away with.
But do you want to keep the alternate, the one that says yes, you can bill travel and legal work at the same time because they're distinct, separate tasks, and because you get the client's consent in advance?
I mean, I feel like doing away with all the alternative and just the inquiry altogether. Is that an option?
I think it is an option. I think based on our last subcommittee meeting, we were kind of talking about, this is clearly something that people have strong feelings on. And
yeah,
the notion that we probably need to answer the question, and maybe if we like the alternative, it's like if we like the alternative opinion result, but we don't like putting that in an actual ethics opinion for fear of what could come. And I guess I have to say, here comes Jack again. I have to say, like, I agree. I'm probably taking a fair amount of like my office of counsel experience into my thought process, where, you know, you've seen some of the, like, we're talking about the ethics process, and most lawyers, 95% of lawyers are good out there. They are good and they're trying to do the best by their clients. But then you have this pocket that I do, where my hesitation comes from. I think it's because I've seen that pocket of lawyers that would look at this and say, oh, I can, like I said before, you know, I can effectively game the system. I can travel for one client. As long as I don't work for that one client, then I can charge somebody else some other time and make more money. Or, you know, whether, you know, it's not 2 minutes or necessarily, but just kind of, if it's a smaller unit, all this stuff, you've seen the exploitative stuff in the grievance process.
Right.
And it doesn't always get to grievance committee. A lot of it, you know, may just be something that gets reported and you may not be able to prove it, but you still see the impact that it has on the client, the member of the public that's complaining about it. And the question that they felt taken advantage of. It doesn't happen all the time, because I think a lot of people just maybe they don't know to complain. Maybe it doesn't happen so excessively. It has happened before, but it doesn't happen all the time. And so that's where I'm like, where I feel like I'm probably overly sensitive to the ways that things can be exploited by those that are looking to exploit. That's where my heartburn comes from, if that makes sense. I don't know. Catherine and Lamar and Bill, I'm curious about Catherine has her hand up, actually.
I want to make a comment to be clear about what I was indicating before. Let me get done. Okay.
I think Judge, I mean, you get to always have the floor.
Oh, no, not on Catherine. Catherine.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think I could be okay with either not doing anything, which was something I tossed out way in the beginning and seemed like a bad idea, but now I'm thinking maybe it's a good idea, or just 1 and 2. If I'm a public person, I fail to see how we are diving and dodging to say that you can bill 1 hour for 2 different people, and that somehow is protecting non-savvy members of the public. I'm not talking about corporations or insurance. I'm talking about your regular people who, frankly, don't read the engagement letters. I mean, I have them sign them all the time. They don't read them and they just sign them. And I get it. That's their responsibility, but I feel like we're lawyering around what we want to do. There's only so many hours in the day. And so it makes me feel like if I'm telling, you know, my mom about this, she's going to be like, oh yeah, lawyers always making sure they get paid. we only have so many hours. You know, you want to call it something else and say, look, I can bill for travel time, but it is a flat fee. Fine. At least it's something different. When we get on this idea of billing, whether it's for copying or for work for a client all at the same time, it just flat out seems disingenuous. And I don't, from a standpoint of the public, I just don't think they're going to like that and feel like it's not protecting them. So that's why I'm kind of back to either A, we don't touch it at all, or B, we do 1 and 2 and leave everything else alone. The other thing is I'm not a big fan of being the first to allow this. And I think it would be contrary to what the ABA says. I was just reading their website. I mean, they say like, this is a big, you can't do this, just what we're about to do. And that doesn't give me any warm and fuzzies either. I like to be cutting edge, but not on how we get paid.
So I just want to make sure I was clear. So when I said I like that new scenario 3, it was with an amendment that it specifically state about the travel being travel expense, not the travel time, like you're billing for 3-hour flight, 3 hours of the time you're on the flight. I mean, you bill them for the flight ticket, and then while you're sitting on the plane riding, you're able to do work for this other person. Like, to me, that's 2 distinct things. So
Okay.
that's what I was meaning by that overlapping. I totally agree with everybody when it comes to, if you got 1 hour and you're doing multiple work, work for multiple clients in that 1 hour, you got to prorate it. I mean, you got to differentiate how much time. That's why I noted the IDS rules, which say if I'm going to court, or when if I'm going to court and I'm representing 4 clients and it's 1 hour, then they all getting billed for. You know what I mean? I'm putting that time portion to each one. And as far as what you were talking about before, Jack, then I would either bill that I'm in court waiting for 1 client, or I wouldn't do in court waiting for that 1 client. I would just separate the time out. Like, to me, those are 2 separate things. I wasn't meaning, I want to be sure I wasn't meaning I'm charging for the 3-hour flight hourly, plus we're doing work and charging somebody else hourly. No, to me, that's overlap. That's not what we want.
No, what I meant, yeah, no, I hear you, Dorothy. What I meant was that in-court time is not travel time. That's full-on time.
Right.
But while I'm having to wait an hour and a half for the judge to deal with issues related to getting a Spanish-speaking interpreter in a courtroom for another matter, I might have to take calls. But those texts and calls that happen during that time, what I'm saying is, in my world, that's just it probably disappears. I mean, those are just gratis things that you do because I'm trying to be responsive to other clients while a judge has me on hold. And the judge has me on hold, not because it's his fault, because the whole system is on pause. And this is where I don't want to micromanage those moments, because in my world, I always lean toward, I'm sure everybody on this call, you lean toward giving benefits to the clients to a fault. I think most lawyers do. And Brian, this doesn't go to what you were saying. I'm sure you see things on grievance that would blow all of our minds, but I'm just talking about, the majority of folks out there.
No, and I get that, Jay. So that's why I guess I'm wondering, you don't do it, but would you think that the rules of professional conduct would allow you to bill that hour of work time while you were waiting for the court, while you're also billing your waiting time for the hearing to be called? Because I know you wouldn't do it, and I think most lawyers are just like you. They're not going to do it. But that's the value question of, would we say the rules say you actually can, even though you're doing work for 2 clients in that same hour, 2 different things, but you can accomplish it without detrimentally impacting the other client. So have at it and bill 2 hours over that 1 hour of time. Do we think the rules say that's okay?
If I understand the question, no. I don't think that's okay.
Brian, can I ask a wild and crazy question?
Please.
Has the state bar, probably not the budget for it, but has the state bar ever considered in these situations where we're just having to guess at what the public would perceive, doing focus grouping, surveying, something to try to get a handle of on a larger scale, like Jack's Wine Group?
No,
By the
no,
way, with the wine is better. It's
Yeah.
a better conversation.
Pay them with wine if we have to.
I mean, we can't expend state funds on alcohol, but so this is, and Lamar, you're absolutely right. It's a great question of we're speculating to some extent, reasonably so, either way on what the public thinks, because some members of the public probably don't even care about this issue, or they are surprised to find out that lawyers are actually, according to the ABA's rule, prohibited from doing so. While other clients would, or other members of the public would react the way that Catherine described, where they roll their eyes and say, of course, lawyers are just going to try to get paid. Of course, they're going to bill for 2 hours over 1 actual hour. Only lawyers can do that sort of thing. You know, so no, we have not done that type of focus group or surveying. Our resources are the members of the public members of the State Bar Council. And I'm wondering if you all tell me if you think this is something, we have time to do this, reaching out to our council members that are non-lawyers, that are aware of the regulatory process, and say, either ask them the questions or ask them to join us for the subcommittee. Say, we are looking at something that really there are logical explanations on both sides. But there's kind of one presumptive answer that dates back, since we started pining on it some 30 plus years ago. And it really is focused on, how does the public perceive this? And we would like public feedback. We could do that. If you all would like that, I can arrange that. It's tough. I see Jack's shaking his head.
Oh my God.
Tell me what you're thinking, Jack.
Oh my God. No. I mean, look, I'm down for whatever y'all want to do. But if you want to talk about going down a quagmire, holy sweet Moses,
This is the issue of self-regulation, right, Jack? That it's this question of when you have self-regulation at its best, it's done by lawyers that are aware of it, acting in the public interest and not in their own self-interest. Because if you push it, if we are not doing that, we get regulated by others that aren't fully aware of the ins and outs, the nuances of our practice, and that
right. I would be willing, exactly, and I'd be willing to bet that anyone you just pull off the street or out of the, they're going to say, well, no, no one can ever bill more than blah 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 blah, because it's not logical. And then you give them the scenario where, well, I bill in quarter hours. And I can quickly show them that, I can bill 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, and quickly get over an hour and then 60 minutes. And then they'll start to think, oh, well, okay. I mean, they're just I'm not saying they're incapable of understanding it. I'm going back to the trust issue, which is what Dorothy was talking about. I'm pointing this way because on my Brady Bunch screen, Dorothy's over here, you're over here. But Dorothy over here, and this goes back to the informal survey I did. But again, these were all people who utilize heavily legal services. And it's not that they want to be ripped off, but they also have a lot of trust in their counsel. And they expect us to make moral decisions. They expect us to make hard moral decisions, because that's what is part of our job as their, not attorney, but as their counselor at law. And they trust us to do that. And if they don't trust us, guess what they do? They get another attorney. We're too expensive, they get another attorney. That's the marketplace. I'm not saying that that's a satisfactory answer for us who are charged with regulating ourselves. I'm just sharing with you the response to a group of people who utilize a lot of legal services very heavily and are very comfortable and fire their attorneys if they don't like it or they don't trust them. They expect us to be, to bring a certain, look, if we want to rip them off, we're going to rip them off. We can write all this stuff all day long. If you want to bill 18 hours a day, you're a scumbag, you're going to do that. And in the long run, you're going to get busted and you're going to be a grievance and you're going to lose your license, and as you should. I'm not saying we don't try to have some firm outline and parameters of what it is we should and shouldn't be doing. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm just saying, I think talking about it here, talking about it in the world, my gut tells me we have to give room for some moral responsibility on the part of the people that we allow to be members of the bar.
Then why don't we just scrap and not enter a rule? I mean, I'm less worried about the savvy people who are used to using attorneys. I'm more worried about the individuals who are not used to hiring attorneys. And
right.
I mean, in 22 years, I think I've had 2 people want to change something in my engagement letter. They're just not reading it. And it's those people, not those in particular, but some of the more at-risk people that I worry about, because those cases don't come through, the state bar. We just don't hear about those attorneys unless something really awful happens. So I just come back to and I know this is full circle because last time Davis, I think, gave us a pep talk about we shouldn't steer away from really hard work and trying to thread the needle. I don't know. Maybe we should and either stick with 1 or 2 or leave the rules where they are. Because then that leaves the moral latitude for people to do the right thing, because we're going to get really down in the weeds, and it's just going to be very difficult to make something that will cover all the different scenarios.
Yeah, and Brian, my feedback from the meeting was that that it was an important issue for everybody, but it was more important to them that we don't overregulate or don't create confusion, and not that we address it, the travel versus billing. That's kind of my takeaway. I'm not thinking that people were like, we've got to have an opinion that says this is okay. I think it was more they were concerned that we would create an opinion that would just cause confusion or not, and somehow saying that was wrong. So, I'm always open to keep going through this, and I do think we need to address the current inquiry number 1, because that's just straight dishonest. And if that isn't a rule, that should be a rule or an opinion. And then I think the flat fee does help add clarity to that, and even the unit billing one. So, but I'm open to discussion on everything.
Brian, what's your gut tell you if we just left 1 and 2, got rid of the rest? Does your gut tell you the state bar is going to be getting calls like, well, what about travel? How's travel factor into this analysis?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I do think that, I don't know that, well, we'll put it this way. I don't think anybody's going to call and ask, can I bill for travel? Or are you saying that billing for travel and billing for work done while traveling is also dishonest? Because those that are going to bill are probably just going to bill. They're going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I think I can imagine some folks that I've talked to in this process that will say, well, so what was the answer on the travel question? Because it's clearly an interesting question. I mean, just looking at all this conversation. So I don't know that we are going to get those calls necessarily, because I think they're going to see that we didn't answer the travel question despite it being in there the first time. And so, yeah, they'll just going to do it.
Let me propose another option then. We keep 1 and 2, we scrap the rest, we come up with a 3 that says it depends as an answer to the rest, however you want to encapsulate the rest. It depends on multiple factors, the sophistication of the client and whether there was informed consent and this, that, and the other, and the reasonableness of the rate charge and whatever factors you want to come up with. And You say it may be okay when you're dealing with a sophisticated corporate client who's used to dealing with these issues and evaluating what's a reasonable charge for travel time, whatever. It may well not be okay if you're dealing with someone who doesn't have the sophistication and wherewithal to evaluate what is reasonable, what is not reasonable. And just so leave it depends for the rest.
I see exactly what you're saying. My fear, though, is that I'll get thrown out the window by the Office of Counsel who has to enforce these things.
But listen, is that worse, or is that the same as saying nothing?
I would prefer that we said nothing, that
Okay.
It depends. Because then it's still, it's something that, ultimately that's, again, that's that other thing that's it's always in the back of my mind of these opinions. They are not, they don't set out the rules. The rules are what gets enforced. The opinions do not, but the opinions are used to bolster someone's argument or justify their conduct, etc. And so that's where I was worried, where I think a lot of my worry with the alternate analysis came from, that somebody, like to Jack, to your point, most people won't even do the thing that the opinion is kind of saying you can do because it's just not the right thing. But now there's an opinion that says you can charge for both of these things at the same time because they're separate tasks or whatever it is. And suddenly do we get complaints? Maybe we don't. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this state that doesn't get complained about, but we still would look at it and say, well, you just can't do that. And so I would prefer to say nothing than it depends. I guess that's the long way of answering that question. But nevertheless, and I guess maybe to that, I wanted to clarify the original number 3 that I had in there that had you can't do the hourly billing, but you can do it with flat fees, per diem. We can add language that clarifies its expenses. Like expenses, of course, are a different thing. Expenses are not the fee for the actual travel, or I guess not the actual travel. Sorry, the expenses cover, the logistics of traveling, but it doesn't compensate for the time spent traveling or the inconvenience associated with travel. That can be accomplished by flat fee, per diem, or this whole prorated thing. Which it sounds like, folks might be doing already, or maybe they're not. It depends on where we are. That is, if that feels too micromanagey, then maybe there isn't really a solution in 3 then. It's like we want to say, no, you can't do that, but we also don't want to say, no, you can't do that, and you have to do this. We want people to just rely on their professional judgment. I don't know. I'm torn on what the appropriate guidance is on this particular topic, because practice areas and practice kind of, realities, norms, etc., really kind of have different experiences. So anyway. Bill, Lamar, sorry, what'd you say, Lamar?
I was inviting Bill because we've all been talking over him. He hadn't spoken yet.
Well, I'm just trying to think. I like what Brian wrote as far as clarification. I think it is such a complicated and convoluted issue that having some level of guidance, and this doesn't apply to me. I can't remember last time I traveled and billed for it. I think the attorney should be compensated for the inconvenience of having to leave town. And I think that was kind of expressed at the full meeting. And I'm okay with this concept of a reduced hourly rate to do that, or a flat rate charge. And I like the kind of if-then type of approach. At least it gives some guidance on that. I agree with the court, the judge saying, you can't multiple bill, there's only 1 hour in a day type of situation. So I also don't go to full extent, though. Full Monty, I would say, is to the extent that that they're necessarily separate things. I don't know, meaning that the travel is a separate than a legal service. I think that kind of runs afoul of that other idea. So I like a little bit of guidance. I like the portion that you deleted, Brian. I also like what Lamar suggested and invite not just, a wide range of people across the state of North Carolina weighing in, but the people that Brian suggested that are members of committees or members of the state bar who understand the administrative process and asking what they think, what the feel is. I like Lamar's idea on that and suggesting that. So I don't know if I would delete number 3 altogether. I'm not terribly concerned about getting into the weeds. This is a weed issue. And if we're the first because we're doing it right, then we're the first because we're doing it right. Is that wishy-washy enough for everybody, or?
Brian, if I could just say one last thing, then I'll be done with my thoughts. At first, I was for the idea under number 3 of offering the flat fee option. But if you get into that, then there's, what does that mean? If someone writes in their fee agreement, well, we reserve the right to charge a flat fee for travel. The amount of the flat fee will be based upon where we're going, how much time is involved, how many layover stops, how many miles we're traveling. So in essence, it's really they're building in an hourly component to it, even though they're calling it a flat rate. So how do you even say from the beginning that we're going to charge one single flat rate for travel when travel could mean driving to Raleigh next door for me, or it could mean flying to LA, even though I've not done that. But you see what I'm saying? So yeah. I would be in favor of a number 3 that just sticks to clarifying that, yes, of course, you can charge travel expenses above and beyond whatever reasonably hourly rate you're charging, you're reimbursing your plane ticket or your mileage or whatever, your hotel bill. But then don't get into the weeds over anything beyond that, including flat rate. That would be my preference or my suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah, when Heidi suggested that in the meeting about a flat travel rate, I don't comprehend what that is, because that'd be exactly what Lamar said. Wherever you're going is different distances, different hours.
What did you all think of the per diem? I think Eben said that he charges a per diem. I guess, is that permissible? Not to call out Eben when he's not here.
I would need more clarification as to what his per diem includes, because normally when I think of per diems, I'm thinking of expenses, not time.
Right.
But
and if it's anything beyond that, then I think we would all agree that, well, it depends on the circumstances. Is it reasonable based upon time, place, and circumstance? And that's nothing we can put into an opinion, right? Or doesn't sound like Office of Counsel wants us to do that.
I draw a distinction between where you sleep at night. Meaning, if you're away from your family, you're away from your kids, is there a fair amount of compensation where you're not necessarily working for the client? You may be sleeping some of that time, but I should be what the example was, is that if someone chose to retain me knowing that I'm from out of county or whatever, am I, and I'm talking more than just the hotel expense, but what about the cost of me being away from my main office, being away from availability to meet with clients, being away from my family? Is that not worth a value above and beyond an hourly rate? I think it is. That's what I would call and I get what we're talking about. I mean, a per diem to me means you get a certain amount of food every day, you get a certain amount of hotel room, whatever. That's what I think what we're talking about is compensating someone for, interrupting their normal life. That's where I draw the line. So,
I have a teen daughter, and so I would prefer to pay somebody to let me go out of town, because no one can mean girl you better. And no one can mean girl you better than a 14-year-old girl. So yeah. I give clients discounts if they will.
I knew you were going to say something.
I was that way until I dropped mine off to college, and then that ride home was a tough one. And I get your point, but
you're right. I mean, I get back to I think we're better served by leaving general nondescript language in there as to the reasonableness Because I'm with Lamar. I mean, I think ideally it's an it depends answer, but I was told from Brian that they don't like that. So if we can't do that, then can we just do something that allows for, the rules as in place that, you have to be reasonable, and not bill excessive fees. The more we try to define that, the more difficult, because how one person practices is very different than someone else.
I think we're all kind of just thinking about this and stewing on how do we create that. I've got an idea that maybe allows examples of what we would consider reasonable versus, or like maybe clearly reasonable versus clearly unreasonable. Of course, our standard is not reasonable, it's excessive, but nevertheless, like if we all agreed, and I don't know if we do, but if we all agreed that that scenario of billing 4 hours of travel, we've got like the scenario that we have in the opinion is focused on this flight, right? You're flying, and you're going to spend 4 hours in the air, and you spend 3 hours working on a brief for a different client while you're in the air. So you bill 7 hours over that 4 hour period of time. If we all agree that that scenario is impermissible, perhaps that's an example of what is unreasonable. But
Yes.
but we have the other scenario of, you have charged a flat fee, or maybe not. I mean, I know flat fees, and I understand your hesitation there, Lamar. I think that's really well put. But like if you have a flat fee that is, or you're paying the expenses, clearly that is reasonable. And then somewhere in between, that's where we're trying to define, not really define, but articulate this idea of what is reasonable, something that's not clearly excessive. It's dependent upon the circumstances. It's dependent upon the inconvenience that the lawyer suffers due to the travel, as well as the client's awareness of the travel charge. Maybe that's some sort of guidance that we provide there that allows enough flexibility. So we kind of define the ends of the spectrum without really defining the middle and where the line actually is. I don't know how it will look on paper, but that's kind of where my mind's at based upon this conversation. I'm wondering if that is an appropriate, if we can find some sort of guidance in that regard. What do you all think of that?
I think it's wise. We're not eliminating the gray area. We're just reducing it somewhat. That's the way I would put it.
Jack, I'm curious your thoughts.
No, I did what Lamar said. I mean, I want to, obviously read it, but
yeah. No, you have to approve it right now without seeing it. Okay. Davis, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that thought to kind of, I don't think we should give up on it for sure.
All right. I'm going to kind of go back to the drawing board on number 3 and see if I can draft an analysis that articulates the ends of the spectrum, but recognizes that professional judgment is a part of being a lawyer, which means navigating the gray depending upon the circumstances and reasonableness of the situation. I'll let you know I'll let you know how it comes out. But I think I feel like that is a wise perspective here. And I think it really kind of brings in, again, the overall sentiment that we had from the full committee. It's not so much that, hey, I don't want you to take this opportunity away from me. I just don't want you to overregulate this aspect, which needs to be flexible based upon all of our different practices in all these different areas of the state with all of these different clients. Okay.
And in crafting that number 3, Brian, remember this access to justice push we're having. I mean, this isn't a pure access to justice issue, but it kind of is when we're making ourselves more available to clients to help solve their problems, because we're giving more incentive to lawyers to answer phone calls on the road and that sort of thing. So you can frame it as an access to justice issue to almost.
Yeah. I think that's where, if you all agree, I feel like there still needs to be some stronger language to emphasize that lawyers can and should be as accessible as the lawyer desires to be to their clients. That there's, you don't, I'm not saying that you have to be at all times, but that if you want to pick up that call, nothing in the rules and nothing in this opinion should dissuade you from doing that and maybe that's where allowing, kind of articulating that there is room to operate here, as long as it's not excessive. I don't want people to get the impression that we're saying, nope, listen to music as opposed to taking your client's call. That's not the point. And I don't think there's anybody at the bar, counsel, staff, et cetera, that would want that to be the case. So I want to articulate that. Okay. Well, I think I have some direction, Davis, kind of, sort of. But I know we've been talking for 75 minutes and we're probably all very tired. Is there anything else that you want me to cover?
No, I just appreciate all the work you put in there. I know you put a lot of work into drafting both kind of both alternatives, and probably your head was spinning as much as ours is.
Yeah, well, and let me just kind of say, I appreciate everyone's input here and everyone entertaining my overthinking ethical nerdiness, because I know that's my job, but it's but still it's something that, you know, you can get in your head so quickly in these things and start spinning around. So I really appreciate your practical perspective that you all bring to this. So thank you.
During the portions of this meeting that I wasn't talking, was I at this meeting? I'm sorry, I haven't had enough afternoon coffee yet.
I think we need to go to Jack's wine group now. So let's start that meeting. All right, this has been greatly helpful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank y'all.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.